Okay, so you know what I was thinking? We ain't talked about my good buddy Dion in a while, Coach Prime. So we're going to do that today. We're going to take a look at Colorado's 2025 college football schedule. This is a series of videos I do every time around this year. There's a playlist called 2025 Schedule Previews. You can click on it. I've done several teams already: Florida, Florida State, Alabama. I think we did Penn State. Anyway, there's several of them, and we're going to keep this series going for another few weeks here as we're just now starting to get into spring practice for most of the teams around the country. These aren't prediction videos. Those will come later, usually around the end of May, beginning of June is when I start to put those out. But these schedule previews are part of what go into developing a prediction for the different teams for me, because as we all know, with conference expansion and teams changing leagues and the Pac-12 going away and all these kinds of things, schedules are drastically different from year to year now than they were a couple of years ago. And they change a lot year over year, depending on how the leagues do their scheduling models. And then you've got non-conference games to consider as well. And when it comes to like getting to the point where you're starting to predict like who you think might win a conference or make a conference championship game, it's not as simple really as just trying to figure out who you think the two best teams in a conference are, right? Because the schedules are so vastly different within the same conference. And we can use examples from last year. If you want to look at the SEC, like Florida is widely considered to have one of the hardest schedules in the country last year because of their SEC conference schedule and the draw that they got there. Whereas Missouri, also in the SEC, exact same conference, had a schedule nowhere near as tough or as difficult as Florida did. Now, in the long run, most of those things will level out. They'll even themselves out. You know, you may end up with a couple of years where you have a really tough schedule, but then when they flip it and they take some of your teams off and put some different teams on, maybe you catch a break and you get a little bit of a lighter schedule for a couple of years. But in a year-to-year basis, the schedules are going to vary drastically from team to team. So taking a look at these schedules is important, obviously. But it also matters in terms of when you get ready to make your predictions for end of season and conference championship games and things like that. So let's take a look at Colorado's schedule. There it is. Now, they overachieved last year. Dion has been a lightning rod in college football. I mean, everybody seems to have an opinion, myself included. But I have to admit they overachieved. They exceeded my expectations. They went 9-4, 9-3 in the regular season before getting absolutely humiliated in whatever bowl game it was they ended up playing in. I can't remember the name of it, but they were in the running to make the Big 12 championship game right up into the last couple of weeks of the regular season. And of course, the way the playoff structure is set up now, if you make your conference championship game, you got a chance at least of getting into the college football playoff. So whatever you think about Colorado, good, bad, whatever, they were a couple of games away from the playoff last year. Can they improve on that in 2025 based on this schedule we're looking at here? Well, I know this isn't a prediction video, but you really can't talk about Colorado at all without mentioning the obvious kind of fact, which is they no longer have Shedeur Sanders and they no longer have Travis Hunter. Who they do have is Deion Sanders. And I think we all know the only reason he's still at Colorado is because no one else wanted him. If anybody else wanted him, he would have been gone. He doesn't really have any interest of coaching in Colorado, in my opinion, now that his three kids are gone, Travis, Shiloh, and Shedeur. But anyway, that's a different story for a different day. He's still at Colorado. The staff is loaded up with ex-NFL players. You know, Warren Sapp on the defensive side of the ball. I saw last week where they brought Marshall Faulk in as running backs coach, I guess. So anyway, he's stacking them up with NFL experience in the coaching room. We'll see what it looks like on the field, but when the season starts. But here's the schedule. Let's go through it. Now, they start out with Georgia Tech. Now, this is obviously interesting to me as a Georgia fan. Georgia plays Georgia Tech every single year, so I get a chance to watch Georgia Tech early in the year take on a Big 12 opponent in Colorado. This is a matchup we don't see very often. And who was alive in 1990? 1990. That was the last time both of these teams won a national championship. If maybe you've only grown up watching football in the BCS era or the now the playoff era, I don't even know if you realize or not, but before we had any of that, you just had random champions crowned at the end of the year without any type of BCS championship game or playoff structure or anything. And in 1990, we ended up with a split national title. Some of the polls crowned Georgia Tech their national champion. Some of the polls crowned Colorado. Very controversial play back in 1990 with Colorado where they were seemingly awarded a fifth down on a goal line situation where they ended up scoring and winning the game, sort of keeping their hopes alive for that national. But anyway, that history lesson doesn't matter. This is an interesting game to me, Georgia Tech and Colorado in the non-con to kick things off on a Friday. That first weekend of college football, they give us usually 5 days of football in a row. You get Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday because it falls on, what is that? I guess that's Labor Day weekend. So this is the first part of that first sort of 5-day weekend of college football that they give us every year in week one. Georgia Tech and Colorado on a Friday night. Very interesting game. Then they host the Delaware Blue Hens. You don't see that team pop up on a schedule very often, but I mean, I'm not going to give Colorado any grief for scheduling them. They've got Georgia Tech, a power opponent there in the non-con, and a lot of teams schedule these lower classification teams. So their first home game of the year will come against the Delaware Blue Hens on September 6th. Then they get their conference schedule underway with a trip to Houston. Houston been a little disappointing to me the last couple of years. We'll see if they can sort of start to get it turned around this year. But you would think that's a game that Colorado would have a significant chance of winning, probably over 50% chance of winning, probably be favored in that game. And then their last non-con game of the year follows that up at home with a game against Wyoming. And this is a potentially tricky game. Wyoming has put some pretty good teams on the field several times over the last decade or so. They have beaten some Power 4 opponents over the years. I don't think by any means that this is some sort of guaranteed win for Colorado. Now, most of y'all know my opinion. If you're a Power 4 opponent, you should beat any lower classification team you play. You should beat any Group of 5 team you play. You should beat any FCS team you play, whatever the case. So Colorado should win this game, but this is one of those dangerous games. The problem with scheduling these types of games, if you win the game, you don't really get any credit for it because they go, well, you're a Power 4 opponent. You're supposed to win that game. Last year, Colorado played, North Dakota State? Is that who it was in week one? They played one of the FCS powerhouses early in the season, and it was a great game. Colorado won. But you don't really give Colorado credit for that because you go, well, it's an FCS team. But God forbid you lose to one of those teams. You get trolled off the internet. Your team loses all respect and credibility. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation here, scheduling these sort of upper end, lower classification schools here. But we'll see. Colorado at home against Wyoming. Colorado should be favored there as well. A rematch of last year's bowl game. They play BYU on September 27th. BYU and Colorado are in the same conference, and normally we don't see bowl games involving teams from the same conference. But because the conferences has gotten so big and the number of conferences has shrunk, that might be something we see more of in the future going forward. Now, Colorado and BYU didn't play during the regular season last year, so it wasn't a rematch situation. But it was a little unusual to see two teams from the same conference wind up in a bowl game. This year, they do play in the regular season. Another home game for Colorado. So another home game for Colorado. I lost my spot on the thing. Sorry. BYU, September 27th. So first 5 games of the season, only one road game. That's at Houston. They get Georgia Tech, Delaware, Wyoming, and BYU all at home. That's their first 5 games of the season. Then another road game at TCU. TCU made a national title game a couple of years ago, and I don't even know if people remember. They seem to have drastically fallen off the cliff. Again, a team kind of like Houston looking to get it turned around this year. We'll see. But when it comes to road games and who you draw in terms of your road opponents in conference, if you look at the first half of this schedule here, even really through the next week when they host Iowa State, let's say that's Georgia Tech, Delaware, Houston, Wyoming, that's 7 games already. Your 2 road games are at Houston and at TCU. Now, obviously, you'd rather play every game at home. Everybody would. It's an advantage to play at home for sure. But if given that schedule, if you could pick any 2 teams and you say, well, you got to play 2 of these teams on the road, TCU and Houston are 2 manageable road environments, I think. So pretty favorable schedule there to start the season out for Colorado. Georgia Tech had a pretty good year last year. I think that could be an interesting game. The BYU game obviously will be interesting. And Iowa State, a pretty good team year in and year out in the Big 12 for a long time now. So they've got 2 or 3 difficult games within that first half of the season heading into their first bye week. But the only 2 road games, though, seem pretty manageable. First bye week on October 18th, pretty good spot there, pretty much dead center of the season. You come out of that, you have a road game at Utah. Cam Rising is back for what seems like his 100th year in a row at Utah. But because this game's not played till October 25th, there's about an 11% chance that Cam Rising will be playing in that game, because Cam Rising is going to have 7 or 8 weeks to get injured before that game ever gets played. No, I don't want him to get injured. I love watching Cam Rising play, but the guy's 28 years old and still playing college because he gets hurt every single year. And he's back again. Utah's a very well-coached team, might be the best coached team all around in the Big 12. They've been there forever. That staff has been together forever. They never have the most talent in the league. They were in the Pac-12 before until last year. They never have the most talent in the league, but they rarely beat themselves. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They're a tough physical team along the lines of scrimmage, something that Colorado has struggled against in their first couple of years under Deion. This could be an interesting game there. Come back home, play Arizona. We'll see. They weren't very good last year. It's kind of funny. People expected a lot out of Arizona last year, and Arizona State was picked dead last in the league. Meanwhile, Arizona pooped all over their foot all season, and Arizona State ended up making the playoffs. So we'll see what Arizona looks like this year, but Colorado gets them at home on November 1st. And then a long road trip all the way out to West Virginia. Rich Rod back in town in Morgantown as head coach of West Virginia. So it's a whole, different verse, same as the first deal. He's back as head coach there. West Virginia looking for a turnaround. The Neil Brown era never really got off the ground. They've decided to make a change. We'll see what Rich Rod can do back at West Virginia. Then you get your second bye week on November 15th. Everybody gets 2 bye weeks this year. And you close the season out with 2 pretty difficult games, at home against Arizona State and on the road at Kansas State. If Utah's the best coach team in the Big 12, Kansas State might be the second best. I really like their head coach. They always have a couple of really exciting playmakers on that team. I like their quarterback. It's Avery Johnson, I think is his name. They've got a couple of really good running backs. One they got from Colorado through the transfer portal. And you got to play on the road in Manhattan, Kansas to close out the season. Arizona State, of course, made the playoffs last year. These are 2 really difficult games to close out the season. In fact, might be their 2 most difficult games of the season. BYU is going to be a good team. Iowa State is going to be a good team, but Colorado plays both of them at home, whereas they have to travel to take on Kansas State on the road. So that might be the most difficult game on the schedule. But there it is. That's Colorado's schedule. Now, what do you think about that? Is it a manageable schedule? If you wanted to do sort of like a floor and a ceiling type, way too early prediction for Colorado, what would you be looking at here? Georgia Tech, possible loss. I'm not predicting that, but if you're trying to say how many games could they possibly lose, maybe Georgia Tech, maybe BYU, maybe Iowa State, that would be 3. Utah, West Virginia, 4 or 5. Arizona State, Kansas State, 6, 7. I see 7 possible losses. I don't think there's any way they lose all 7 of those. Maybe they split them, and they end up with a record similar to last year, sort of a 9-3 type of deal. I would put the floor somewhere around 7-5. I do think there are 5 or 6 games on here that Colorado definitely could lose. You got to remember, first year starting quarterback up there, probably going to be a freshman, replacing a lot of talent at the wide receiver position. Now, they've, of course, retooled the roster through the portal like they do every year, so we'll see how many sorts of hits they get there and how many misses they get. That's kind of the key to living and dying with the portal, right? You need significant contributions from the majority of your portal players in order for the portal process to work. So we'll see. But there's the schedule. Let me know what you think about it. I appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.